and then it was able to get a salary off of her estate. So, I mean, this isn't something that was just in the 1920s. This was even, later in the 60s and 70s.
Allison Herrera is a senior reporter covering Indigenous affairs for the investigative journalism outfit APM Reports. Allison, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sari, for having me on.
You can follow along with Econ Extra Credit by subscribing to our free newsletter at marketplace.org/newsletters. Next month's movie is the 1983 version of Trading Places. And the United Auto Workers have voted to approve a new contract with General Motors, making its workers the first to approve such an agreement. 54.7% of members voted in favor. The contract was more popular among union members at Ford and Stellantis. From APM, American Public Media.
At ViStar Credit Union, we believe in helping members reach their financial goals and building stronger communities. It's why we offer our members better rates and give back to the places we call home. ViStar Credit Union. Visit vistarcu.org/join. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
It's the biggest stories of the week. Campus tensions grew in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war, forcing one local university to shift a planned lecture from in-person to virtual. Defense attorneys in a high-profile murder case seek to oust prosecutors. Mayor Deegan shares plans on how to spend $26 million she earmarked in the city's budget. Jaguars receiver Zay Jones was arrested Monday for domestic battery, but back on the field Wednesday. I'm Ann Schindler, and just ahead this hour, our media gurus examine the week's top stories with our First Coast Connect Week in Review. Then, our weekly JME DJ session. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
And good morning. It's 1 minute after 9 o'clock. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Michelle Coram. The Nights of Lights event returns Saturday night in downtown St. Augustine. As WJCT News 89.9's Stephen Ponson reports, the annual event is a major boon for local businesses.
Thousands of people are expected to flock to downtown St. Augustine this weekend for the 30th annual Nights of Lights. Jimmy Hill, president of Adventure Boat Tours, says this event is a big deal for his business.
What we end up with is a lot of families gather, and they look for ways to go do something special that is a family-oriented, event.
Hill says the 3 months of Nights of Lights is responsible for around 60% of his business during the 3-month display. For Ancient City Brewing, located next to the busy Plaza de la Constitucion, General Manager Britta Messler says they see as much as a 90% increase in business.
So for us, it really is like almost a double increase almost for at least the first month between Thanksgiving, all the holidays, and then up until Christmas.
Nights of Lights runs through January 28th, and during that time frame, tens of thousands of people are expected to come out and see the glow in the night sky that comes from more than 3 million lights. Opening ceremonies begin at 6:30 Saturday night in the plaza downtown. Stephen Ponson, WJCT News 89.9.
The Great Tree Giveaway and Paper Collection event is running from 9 to 1 tomorrow at the Lot E parking lot at Adams Street across from Everbank Field. It's sponsored by Greenscape and Keep Jacksonville Beautiful. Drivers can drive up, pop their trunk, and get free trees as they drop off up to 2 30-gallon bags of paper documents that will be hauled off-site for shredding. And it's raining in Jacksonville, 67 degrees.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Opinions expressed on the First Coast Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of WJCT News.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and you're listening to First Coast Connect. It's Friday, so that means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. I'm going to be talking to four of my favorite local media mavens about some of the big headlines of the week. Among our topics, protests in support of besieged Palestinians as local leaders push back on rising anti-Semitism, how the conflict is playing out on local college campuses. Plus, the defendant in a high-profile murder case wants to kick prosecutors off the case. And the mayor rolls out spending priorities and political priorities. Then, allegations against a Jaguar rekindle concerns about domestic violence in the NFL. And later, JME previews new music releases. It's a full show today, so let's get to it. Joining me today, Travis Gibson, digital reporter with News for Jax. Good morning, Travis. Nice to have you for the first time here. Trisha Booker, journalism professor, author, and former reporter. Welcome.
Hi, Ann.
Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Buddy's in the house, too, you should know, her dog. So we've got a good vibe in the room. Taylor Levesque, a multimedia journalist at First Coast News, and also on for the first time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My former colleague. And David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union.
Good
Hi,
morning.
David. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Ann, everyone.
You can listen live on the radio. You can also watch our live stream right now on Facebook and the WJCT YouTube page. But don't just watch. Please join our conversation. Are you a local college student? Have you been part of or affected by campus protests about the war between Israel and Hamas? Give us a call at 549-2937. Tag us on X at FCC On Air or send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also message us on the First Coast Connect Facebook and Instagram pages. So let's start this off. Trisha, you work at UNF. We should make clear you're not speaking on behalf of the university.
Correct.
But campuses around the country have been roiled recently by protests and threats of violence since the brutal attack on Israel and the country's retaliatory attack on Gaza. This week's protests came to your campus at UNF this week. What's the vibe there? Are things tense? Are you hearing students talk about this? Tell us what you're feeling and experiencing.
Students are talking about this. Something that happened earlier this week is that the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. came on behalf of the World Affairs Council to give a speech. And security was really, really tight. There were dozens of cop cars that were keeping people from even entering the parking lot without a ticket. But there were some protesters who got in, and when the former ambassador began to speak, apparently, according to my sources, they stood up and they had their hands dyed red kind of in protest of what's happening in Palestine. They were escorted out. At the same time, there were a group of probably 100 protesters or more who were coming from the Green, and they met each other. The protest didn't get violent. It was definitely a protester vibe. There was no anti-Semitism that I heard about, but it was definitely the students speaking out on behalf of Palestine.
And so this is it's a prestigious event. This is the World Affairs Council lecture series. And I understand that this initially was going to be an in-person discussion, but then it was switched somehow. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, they were concerned about security, and so it was live streamed instead. So he was actually in the building, but he was in a smaller room with a select group of people, and they live streamed the event to ticket holders who were in an adjacent ballroom.
David Bauerlein, in Florida, where everything is political, state lawmakers and even our own city council have jumped into this debate. Most recently, we had the Florida University system say that they were going to shut down a pro-Palestinian student organization, Students for Justice in Palestine. That was a request that kind of came at the behest of the governor on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, the ACLU sued. What's going on with this particular debate? It's a First Amendment issue.
It really is a First Amendment issue. And if you think about it in history, college campuses have traditionally been a place where these issues are debated, sometimes hotly, but they do get out in the open. Sometimes they can sway public opinion. And that's where a lot of these roots of some of the anti-war movement has started, a lot of the anti-apartheid, different things over over our history have been rooted in college campuses. So it very much is a First Amendment issue. And where do you draw the line? I mean, the argument would be, well, a student group is supporting a terrorist organization, Hamas. And so therefore, there should not be getting any kind of taxpayer support through the campus organization. Well, are they really supporting Hamas? Are they speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people? Do they just want a just resolution to this conflict, which has been going on now for decades? So that it really is very much a First Amendment issue. Where is that line drawn? And you're right, the ACLU and this group and the University of Florida pushed back and said, you're violating our First Amendment rights by taking this action because you don't like our speech. And if it's us this time, it's going to be somebody else next time.
I think UNF has in a bit of a quagmire because we have had a history of isolated anti-Semitic happenings. There have been swastikas drawn on dorm rooms, and some of the Jewish students that I've spoken to don't want to talk about being Jewish. They're genuinely afraid. Now, in this recent spate of protests, I have not seen any evidence of anti-Semitism, but I think the university is deathly aware that this is potential, and they want to avoid that.
You know, Taylor, this is a time when, kids are finding their political voice when they're in college. It is a time when they're trying out new, experimenting with political realities and kind of who they're going to be in their adult life. I believe you're a Gator. Yeah. So one of the campuses that was involved in this, where the student group was active, was the University of Florida. The other was the University of South Florida. How do you think students interpret an effort to mitigate or manage their messaging when it comes to their political beliefs?
I think especially for students in college, it's important for you to feel like you have a voice out there no matter what your beliefs are. And especially University of Florida, there's a big community there where people feel like they can speak out, and I think that's important. But it also brings up the violence factor of that. Are they supporting violence, or do they really want change in the world somehow? So I think it's important, but also I think it, like what you said, it's mitigating that factor of what are they really supporting, and kind of understanding that from a student's perspective, but then also from what's happening in the world today.
Travis, I want to ask you about that because the Florida is now saying that they're backing away from the idea that they're going to ban these campus groups. Now they're saying that they want them to offer some guarantee that they're not supporting, the message or a terrorist mission. And while that seems to make sense, it also remains a First Amendment issue. I mean, people can believe all sorts of unpopular or even terrible things, and that's not really a government role in most cases.
Right. What sticks out to me is Governor DeSantis and kind of the GOP in Florida have been really willing to push the boundaries on what is constitutional. This started kind of during COVID, redistricting. They're willing to kind of put it out there, push the boundaries, get it in the court system, and kind of see, hey, what can we change here? They'll try to win on appeal. So they're really pushing the boundaries, but 100% it is a First Amendment issue. These are arguments that have been going on college campuses for years during these hot topic issues. And, it is interesting, too, how this really is kind of a youth movement, specifically when you're talking about Palestinians and Israel. I look at TikTok and Instagram, and there's lots of people voicing one way or the other. And it just seems to be very much they've picked this as their topic right now.
And it's hard to ignore. I mean, the news really is so devastating. David, the bill that was subsequently introduced after the issue of kind of pulling back from this student organization, Florida lawmakers now want to take scholarships from students who are receiving aid if they are, quote, promoting a foreign terrorist group. How legal is it for them to base scholarship or financial aid on someone's political leanings?
Well, I think that would be challenged for sure in court. I mean, the idea would be that if you are a Florida resident, you're getting in-state tuition, and you say something that crosses the line. What is that line? I mean, what does it mean to promote a terrorist organization? I think there's a lot of constitutional issues that would be involved in that. Now, having said that, it will probably pass. We have seen the Republican Party in Florida has really come with a lot of organized support for Israel in this conflict. And it's a Republican-controlled legislature. It's a Republican in the governor's mansion. And then there will probably be some challenges to it. It's Travis makes a great point, which is there's been this ongoing attempt to legislate what people can say in First Amendment grounds. And this would be the latest one. So far, the courts have really not been going along with what the state of Florida is wanting to do, but they continue to do it. And so for sure, this would probably have some legal challenges if it's enacted into law, which seems it likely will.
But I think beyond that, I mean, even if it's challenged, if it were challenged successfully, the chilling effect is going to be ongoing. And it's not only legislatures threatening to take away scholarships. There are companies and corporations that are withdrawing job offers based on public statements or that organizations have made that students belong to. And I think in many cases, the students who are losing jobs because of this don't even know that these groups are speaking on behalf of them. So I think the chilling effect is definitely something to be concerned about.
It is interesting to see the engagement. You know, I was noticing that just the gas station that I go to all the time, the gentleman who works behind the counter, who I see all the time, was wearing a keffiyeh. I think just kind of as a symbol now of solidarity with Palestine. Taylor, what are you seeing in your everyday life about this conflict? And I mean, there was some campus demonstrations, but also a large demonstration at Town Center recently.
Yeah, I've seen it from both sides, people speaking out on both sides in support of both. And I want to also make the point, in August, I worked on a story with the FBI about extremism. And a lot of people are taking to social media. They rely on social media to get a lot of their information and to also put out some of that information. And law enforcement told me, you know, these views, they're not illegal, but it's what's behind them. Are you ingesting this information and could possibly use that to be violent, or using that as kind of an influence? Or I think it's also that conversation. So I think especially what I've seen is a lot on social media, especially TikTok. TikTok is a huge one where people are posting from these rallies in support or not in support. And I think that's, especially social media, is a big thing for any age group.
We want to hear from you. If you've got a question for our panel or you have a comment about what we're discussing today, give us a call at 549-2937. Tag us on X at FCC On Air, or send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media through the First Coast Connect Facebook and Instagram pages. So Florida became the first U.S. state to outlaw these groups. Is there a sense, Travis, that this might be a initial part of a trend, or do you think that the pushback that Florida's getting for some of these initiatives may tamp down that enthusiasm?
I mean, I think it's very politically popular to, back Israel. I mean, they're a longtime ally of ours. The president has come out and voiced strong support for them. I mean, there's always issues with when you talk about First Amendment rights, but I think that there will be more legislation like this because it does, in general, get broad support. And I think the argument that if you're supporting Hamas, or, you could make that argument, supporting Palestinians equals supporting Hamas. That's not always, the right equivalency, but, you can get some steam behind that. So I do see other states catching on.
And this is also at a time, we should say, of growing anti-Semitism. The Jewish community here and elsewhere clearly fearful. There's been a rise in neo-Nazi rhetoric here and elsewhere. And, in Paris, there's people who are spray painting blue stars of David on people's homes, Jewish people's homes. So, David, I mean, this is obviously a geopolitical issue that has gone, has decades of history, as you say. But is there a sense that there really is something different fomenting right now in the U.S. and other places when it comes to that kind of rhetoric?
I think there is. I think for whatever reason, this particular conflict has really sparked this debate, and there's a lot of. I've been surprised at how many protests there have been here locally. I kind of thought, well, the city council did a resolution on it, and that's going to be the end of it. It was a little surprising they got involved in it, but this really is something that seems to be pretty deeply embedded now in terms of a lot of people have staked really strong positions on this. And so I do think it is something that we're going to continue to see more of these protests. And it'll be interesting to see is there's going to be a long war and how different news events come up. The question you had earlier, Ann, just about what other campuses are doing. I did read that Columbia University suspended its branch of this Palestinian student group. And the argument there was that they, and also a group called Jewish Voices for Peace, saying that they had staged unauthorized events that included, quote, threatening rhetoric and intimidation. And I think that's really where we are in terms of how do we as a society draw that line. I would say that taking a camera and projecting a swastika on a building in downtown Jacksonville, to me, that's threatening. It's intimidating. It's meant to be threatening. It's meant to be intimidating. If you're a Jewish student at a campus and you're going by a protest where people are saying that Israel needs to be wiped off the face of the earth, then you're probably feeling pretty intimidated there. And that's what's so difficult about enforcing the First Amendment. It's a right, and where do you draw that line? And I think we're having a hard time right now finding where that line should be drawn in terms of the debate about this particular conflict.
Absolutely.
And Tricia, as a journalism professor, as well as a former reporter, talking about the fact that a lot of people are getting their information from social media, and as Taylor and Travis said, primarily TikTok. Does that give you concern? I mean, that's how people in a certain age group are getting most of their information. A lot of that information is being posted by people in that same demographic. What is the concern with having that be such a primary source?
Well, I noticed today that there was a meeting yesterday between executives of TikTok and celebrities who were speaking on behalf of the Jewish community, saying TikTok has got to do more to get the anti-Jewish, the anti-Semitic rhetoric off of TikTok. But yeah, I talk to my students all the time about that, how if you see something on TikTok that you think is newsworthy, you've got to go down the rabbit hole and find out where that came from initially. I constantly have students come in referring to things they saw on social media, and they refer it to it as the ubiquitous they. Well, they said, or they said this, or they know. And it's a huge concern because sometimes it's misinformation, but sometimes it's disinformation. Sometimes it's stuff that's put out there that they are meant to believe incorrectly. So I focus on that in all of my classes, whether it's a writing class or a journalism class. I focus on trying to get them to find the source of the information and develop theories or ideas for themselves rather than other people's take on it.
But difficult, Travis, with so much deliberate misinformation put out there. It really is used to advance narratives that very often are inaccurate.
Right. I mean, that's the challenge, right? And you're talking about a war happening on the other side of the world where there's not always, boots on the ground. You're talking about a media industry that's shrinking, and a lot of their, journalists that used to work in these areas aren't employed anymore. I mean, the filters of that are kind of disappearing. So people are sometimes relying on people who don't have these credentials, and obviously, they can have opinions, they can have agendas. They're not properly trained for certain things. That it just opens up a whole host of issues.
I think it puts a lot more pressure on television journalists, frankly, because people aren't reading as much as they used to. We've become kind of an illiterate society. We know how to read, but we're choosing not to. And so people are getting their news in fits and starts, and a lot of that is from television. It puts a lot of pressure on you all to get all of the news out there, which you can't do. You don't have that kind of time.
Especially, I think, with the presence of social media today, people are looking to get the information as fast as they can. And especially with TikTok or going through Twitter, you read a couple things, and then you move on, and then that's in your head of what you believe to be true.
Absolutely.
We've got a call. Todd on the south side, I think, wants to weigh in. Good morning, Todd. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning to everyone. I don't know if you spoke about this yet, but this conflation that's going on regarding Judaism and Zionism. And I wonder that you could, if you haven't talked about that yet, if you could explain that to the audience. The other thing is, I think that what most people are just calling for is a ceasefire. And I think that that's not too much to ask for. But if you look at what the media is putting out, just they're calling demonstrators terrorists. And I think that that is really crossing the line when people are peacefully protesting across the country, around the world, and just asking for a ceasefire.
Thanks, Todd,
Thank
for
you.
your call. David, your thoughts?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of Todd's question, but
Todd, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Can you just clarify the first part of your question?
Yes, I wanted to have you guys kind of explain the difference between Zionism and Judaism, because they're being conflated.
Gotcha.
And I think this is one of the reasons why they're saying that there's so much anti-Semitism going on. It's not anti-Semitism. It's anti-Zionism.
Gotcha. Good question. And so I think that obviously there's a mix of both. There is definitely anti-Semitism out there, but the idea that people are protesting Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories, it would be more aligned with the Zionist, movement than simple just being Jewish or, having a Jewish identity.
And I'm probably going to have to pass on really trying to be an authoritative voice on that, because I don't want to say something that's going to kind of so incorrect. Speaking of people getting things and misinformation, and so I know that there is a distinction between Zionism and Judaism in terms of the religion versus the nation state, and certainly Israel should not be above criticism. I think that would be true of any nation state in our world, and so yeah. At what point, So I think that's a lot of the protesters are protesting against actions that Israel has taken, and there are people obviously who are taking protests against the actions that Hamas has taken, which are pretty horrific.
We got an email from Jay saying we need to teach our young people to moderate their views, to have compassion. In this specific instance, to understand that they can have compassion for both the Israel and Jewish people and the Palestinian people. We need to learn and teach our young people to stop engaging in verbal or physical violence. That's a challenge, Taylor. I know that the stories that you've been doing about extremism talk about how easy it is for people to be drawn into an angry posture as opposed to a more thoughtful one.
And I think especially, like we said before, with the presence of social media, people rely on that for really everything. And the more that you ingest that, it's easy to get clouded or, change your judgment, fact versus fiction. So I definitely think that's huge.
We've got a call, Don Juan from the South Side. Good morning, Don Juan. Give us your opinions.
Well, I got two things to say. I was going to mention something about what you were talking about DeSantis and the GOP in Florida. And my comment on that was how they infringe on rights selectively on parents, where they would oppose mask mandates, but they would say let the parents choose if the child wants to wear a mask or not. But then when it came to books, they wanted to choose for the parents what their children can read, and they will not allow parents to decide whether they can read that or not. So it seems like contradictory in a way. And second, it has to do with the Israeli and the Palestinian conflict. I find that, and I'm sure you heard this before, that many people criticize the Israeli government for what they have done to the Palestinians for decades. But then people twisted and politicians twisted where they say you're attacking Jewish people all over, and the general race, the general religious Judaism, as opposed to realizing you're criticizing only the Israeli government.
Thanks so much for your comments. Appreciate it. Any final thoughts? I'm going to move on to our next topic.
I think he has a really good point about the DeSantis and the GOP cherry picking their First Amendment and choices among citizens. I was thinking about this yesterday, how it's perfectly okay for campus preachers, for example, to be on campuses statewide and say really hateful things, calling students whores and calling for the death of LGBTQ people. And that First Amendment speech is protected. I don't know. It's an interesting dichotomy there.
Good point. All right, I want to move now to a court case that's getting a lot of attention here and even internationally. It involves the murder of a father of four in Jacksonville Beach in 2022, Jared Bridegan. He was shot to death in front of his 2-year-old who was in the car at the time. Now, his former wife and her new husband, Mario Fernandez, are accused of orchestrating this hit. Taylor, you've been covering this case for months, but there was an interesting development this week. Tell us about it.
So the defense filed a motion requesting for the prosecutors on the case to be thrown off. They are claiming there was a breach in confidentiality with over 66 pieces of emails in communication between Mario Fernandez and his attorneys. So it was about 60 to 70 pages with the not the motion, but with the motion, all of the evidence, and the files that the defense is claiming that the state had access to that was, they're saying, covered under attorney-client privilege. So that's eventually will be up to a judge to decide whether the state had access to all that information that the defense is saying that they shouldn't have.
So the prosecution hasn't responded yet to that. The state attorney's office, I believe, said that they think it'll be, ultimately resolved in their favor. But Travis, this case has been going on for a long time. So the investigation started when Jared Bridegan was killed in February 2022, and then his confessed killer, the man who admits that he pulled the trigger, was taken into custody that fall. He wasn't formally charged until January of this year, and then Mario Fernandez wasn't arrested until this past March, and his wife not until just this past fall. So that's a long period of time where we're talking about, wiretaps being used, surveillance, a lot of information that investigators were able to collect, including some of these communications, apparently, between attorneys for the defendants.
Right, and there's allegations that Shanna Gardner plotted to kill her ex-husband as far back as 2015. Which, you wonder how they know that. Are there emails? Did they learn that in the wiretap? But I think the wiretap, that was very interesting to me, that they had to go to these links to kind of learn. And I would imagine possibly make the case, although they do have Henry Tennant, as you mentioned, who has confessed to the shooting, which will obviously be an important witness. But the wiretaps is going to be crucial evidence, and if there is questions surrounding those and these communications that are probably huge pieces of evidence that prosecutors rely on, it could just throw a wrench in this whole thing, that in a case that has dragged on for already a long time.
David, how do prosecutors thread that needle when they're collecting, and investigators are collecting evidence for a case that they're trying to build? And in this case, we know for a fact that Shanna Gardner had an attorney hired many, many months before her husband was arrested. He indicated at the time it was to handle her custody issues because they had had a very bitter divorce. But these filings now indicate that the conversations captured included her communications with that attorney here in Jacksonville. So how does a prosecution supposed to handle when they're collecting material that is privileged communication?
Yeah, well, I would think that probably, you would not record that to begin with. And then if you do record it, then you do not just, you take that and you find a way to put it under some kind of isolation, or move it away from all the other evidence streams, so it is completely quarantined from all the other collection of evidence that you're doing, because attorney-client privilege is well understood by everybody, is pretty sacrosanct and in our law. So I think that from what I've read from some of the reporting Taylor's done, that if the facts are as they've been presented, then there's a real problem for the state attorney's office in being able to pursue the case by the state attorney here. It doesn't mean the whole case falls apart. It just means maybe they have to go to a different circuit where there's a group of attorneys who have not had been exposed to any of this at all. The other thing is we don't really know what were these conversations, right? I mean, if it was just, when are we going to meet, or, what's the, what time can you get there? If they're that kind of stuff, or they're actually substantive stuff, that maybe that's a threshold question as well.
I feel like at least part of the legal filings included the fact that there were text messages that were either deleted or recovered between Mario Fernandez, who's charged in this case, and Henry Tennant, who's admitted to killing Jared Bradigan. So that would seem a fairly consequential bit of evidence communicated between a defendant and his attorney.
And in the motion, it stated from the very beginning, from when Mario Fernandez was arrested, that the defense made it clear that there could have been something on his phone, which was confiscated by police from the very beginning. And there had been also in that motion multiple emails between the defense and prosecutors wanting to get that information kind of away from prosecutors before they were able to review it. So it's interesting whether or not that communication is within some of those confidential communications uploaded to that portal.
So, Tricia, I'm bringing this fact that you actually knew Shanna Gardner pretty well.
I did. I met her at the YMCA in Ponte Vedra. We worked out together. She was a group trainer there, and I actually introduced her to CrossFit, which is where she met her husband.
Huh. And so do you have any special insight that you can offer us about who she is as a person or her relationship with I mean, obviously it was a difficult relationship you had with her ex-husband.
Yeah, and I never met her ex-husband or her current husband, to be clear. I mean, I trusted her enough that she babysat my kids, which my kids are constantly reminding me about these days. But she seemed like a young woman who had a lot of energy, and she was struggling. She had 2 young kids, trying to make ends meet on her own. She complained a lot about her life and her lot in life, but I didn't find that unusual. A young single mom with 2 young kids, it's hard. So all of this did come as quite a surprise to me. I haven't spoken to her in years, probably over 10 years, but yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody in Ponte Vedra who knew her would have predicted that something like this would come to fruition.
And Travis, to be clear, I mean, single mother, yes, but she does have a fairly wealthy family that she, I believe, is able to rely on in terms of financial support during this process. They're multi-millionaires in Utah. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, and that was part of the divorce got very ugly, with fighting over the money. So yes, she has the resources. That's why she's able to bring in this high-profile attorney, who has kind of changed, how people are perceiving this case, and will probably bring even more national attention to this case because he worked on the Casey Anthony case and Aaron Hernandez. I mean, it has the potential to really, make this case a national focus.
And I would guess the prosecutor office here would be very resistant to letting this case go to a different circuit to be prosecuted. I mean, they have a strong relationship with the family, the victim's family here. They often stand by prosecutors at press conferences as a show of allegiance and support. I would guess that, David, local prosecutors would fight that pretty mightily.
I would think so too, Ann. I mean, definitely they've invested a lot of time, as you mentioned, relationships with the family members. And so I would think, yes, they were going to really bring as much to bear as they possibly can to fight back that motion to move the case to a different circuit. And not just for matters of professional pride. They may feel like it's really a case that should be tried and heard by the people of this community.
That's right. And so, Taylor, what happens next?
So this will, from the experts I've talked to, this will go to an evidentiary hearing where the judge will decide whether the state did have access to these confidential communications that were protected under attorney-client privilege. And as far as I know, both Shanna and Mario will be in court the first week of December.
All right. Also this week, Mayor Donna Deegan unveiled her proposed spending plan for $26 million, about what she had earmarked in her 2024 budget. Top of mind, David Bauerlein, this is an issue that you first wrote about. Her spending priorities that she had mentioned during the budget process, but she wanted to be able to have this reserve money to really target those priorities. So what did you learn about how she intends to spend that money?
Well, first of all, it's going to be spent a lot of different ways. I mean, there's line items within line items. So, and I think she's taking on some really big issues. I mean, you want to take on homelessness, affordable housing, youth programs, literacy. All of these things are multi-year type. Healthcare. I mean, to what extent can you move the needle with the proposals that she's put forward. So it's very much, to my mind, a first installment on what she would do in future budgets. The main drivers are housing, both homelessness and affordable housing. Youth programs is very much a big part of what she's working on. There's also some aspects there for a new veteran center, which is something she talked about. So that would be a future cost. And it's going to be interesting what kind of questions she gets from the council auditor and council members, because one question would be, okay, this is your first budget ask. What about future years? If we say yes to this, are we then committing to future spending, and in what amounts? And also, how are you going to measure whether these actually are going to be effective or not?
So Mayor Deegan came on our program this week to answer some questions from our listeners. This is what she had to say about her proposed initiatives. Let's hear a little bit of that.
We're really excited about the opportunity to move some of these initiatives forward in Jacksonville. In addition to what we've already done, in the budget previously, these are some of these are feeding programs that we think are working well, and some of them are programs that we're hoping to grow. Just excited to get in front of council, and we've been talking to council about this now for weeks and months, and hopefully they've got a good synopsis and we're ready to go.
So getting this before council, Travis, I think we could say fairly that her relationship with council so far has been a little rocky. Is her financial vision going to be better received perhaps than some of her political appointments?
Well, yeah, I think they're aligned on some things. The city council has been meeting with the school district in recent weeks, and they've talked a lot about literacy and how that is a big push. And they've actually, tied it to crime and said, if we get in there and we help kids, achieve in literacy young down the road, it can help, drop crime and things like that. So I think that is a simple, one that they can line up on. Affordable housing, that's a key issue, I think, across the spectrum. So I think, and then the one thing that stuck out to me was the pools. I know it's only a couple dollars, but that was something, just a simple, she said a no-brainer last year. Almost a dozen pools were closed. There's money in there to maintain pools and kind of keep those open. So I think these are kind of issues that everyone can agree on, and I do think she will have some support outside of those questions. How much are we tying ourselves to in the future?
And it seems like she's trying to give a few lollipops to the community too. Wi-Fi in every park, I thought was kind of an interesting one. Another thing that she's been talking about is, trying to build a tree canopy in the city to help with carbon, but also plant trees that are edible. So like fruit trees and nut trees, which I thought were kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about her commitment to affordable housing in the context of the recent Ameris settlement, the redlining settlement, where $9 million is now the Justice Department was able to get to help Black and Hispanic neighborhoods in Jacksonville, particularly in Jacksonville. So that's more than double what she's putting toward it. And I thought, well, maybe putting them together, that could really make a difference.
Yeah, and we also spoke to the United Way this week, and they've got a $10 million initiative that they announced this week that is going to do a couple of things. One is infill in some downtown neighborhoods, but also try to deal with the heirs property issue, which is basically when somebody has inherited a home but they don't have proper title to it. But that can really impact a neighborhood. So, yeah, I think there's a few chunks of money that are going towards these kind of programs. Taylor, how do you think she's determining what projects she's going to prioritize and use this money to kind of send a message?
I think it's based on the issues and the things that need to be addressed in the community. We know that she's held all these community meetings as well, so she's probably heard from hundreds, if not thousands of people, what they want the money to go towards or what they want change in their communities, whether that's education, more accessible to education, or more affordable housing. I mean, we all know the price of things these days. It's really hard for a lot of people to survive. And so I think this is probably a result of her hearing from people here in Jacksonville. It's an ever-growing city, and so changing with the times, and this is probably just a result of that.
David, we did ask the mayor about your reporting on a no bid contract issue. That was a story that you came out with, I believe, last week. So just give us a brief description of what the issue was there.
So the issue there was that there was a no bid contract awarded to Langton Consulting, which is a Jacksonville firm, to do grant writing and then lobbying the federal government and also public policy development. And so the question was why that didn't go out for bids and just invite every firm in Florida or the U.S. to come in and give us your best offer, and then we'll score them, and whoever comes out on top gets the contract, which is the way these contracts are usually done. And then the explanation from the mayor's office has been that they did some research and there was no other firm anywhere in the country but Langton Consulting that could do what we wanted this contract to do. And that's got some, I mean, I've done some reporting to see whether that actually is the case. The city council has looked at it and said basically they thought it was not a real in-depth search and that they should have put the contract out for bid and just got competitive offers.
I will say that the mayor did say that she said that they did go through the procurement process, in an open and transparent fashion, and stood behind the bid process. I want to just go briefly here to talk about an arrest this week. Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Zay Jones appeared in court on Tuesday, allegedly had a domestic incident with his wife when they were doing a custody transfer. It sounded like there was possibly some scratch marks found on her neck. Travis, what is how does this fit into the larger narrative about the NFL and domestic violence?
Well, I think we can all agree maybe the NFL doesn't have the best track record when it comes to handling issues of domestic violence. The New York Times did a story last year that said generally players pay a small price after they're accused of violence towards women. It doesn't affect their career negatively. I mean, some of the exceptions are when it's caught on video, in the case of Ray Rice. But even looking at the case of Tyreek Hill, audio came out of him talking about it. He is back to being a superstar. He got a huge payday with the Miami Dolphins. So there's some inconsistencies, but the general thought is by a lot of people is if you're a good player, they'll find a way to get you on the field.
And we should be clear, I mean, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. However, he was back on the field, Taylor, just 48 hours or so after his court appearance.
Yeah, and I also read that he's been out most of the season, but seeing that he's back on the field practicing. Yeah.
I wondered if someone was arrested who perhaps worked for the mayor or was in another high-profile position, if they would be back at work 48 hours later. There seems to be kind of an inconsistency. Now, obviously, he's innocent until proven guilty, but it just, to me, it seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect when it comes to our professional sports and how we treat issues like this.
So Chris Claybrooks, who was a cornerback for the Jaguars, was arrested in July, and he's actually still on, reserve or suspension or whatever they call that. But David, what do you make of that? What's your thought about if somebody in city government was arrested on a similar charge?
Yeah, if it was a high-profile position, I think that person would be asked to resign. And so then you get into the issue as are football players more than just football players? Do they represent something to the community? And that, in some sense, it gets back to the question: are they and should they be role models? And I think that's my personal feeling is yes, they should be role models. They are out there in front of our youth, in front of our community, and their standards are something that are the community standards. And now, Travis makes a great point, which is the cases that really get the most punishment are ones where there's actual video. There's no video. We don't really know what happened. And so that's really the big telltale sign is when you see video and you're like, well, I just can't watch that person. I find it hard now to, it's very jarring to see a player usually seeing a Jaguars uniform then standing before a court in an orange jail jumpsuit.
And sometimes it has to do with history, right? I mean, Zay Jones doesn't have any sort of, as far as I know, any sort of history of any sort of incidents like this. I mean, I was generally surprised. He's kind of a mild-mannered guy, well-liked by a lot of people. So, I mean, there is that element of, did he make a mistake and get a second chance? That will all kind of play out in court.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It's time now for our lightning round. Trisha, you go first since you called the lightning.
All right. This weekend at one of my favorite places in Jacksonville, Cork, which is the corner of Russell and King. It's a warehouse filled with artist studios, and they're having an open house from 12 to 6 on Saturday and Sunday. You'll be able to visit all of the artists' studios. They're going to have treats there and libations. You'll be able to visit Bab's Lab. Barbara Colacello runs that. She has story slams there and storytelling workshops, and it should be fun.
Awesome. David.
Sounds fun. Well, as somebody who came late to enjoying soccer as a sport, it's wild to me that we have not one but two potential soccer franchises in Jacksonville, one wanting to build downtown, the other one in the suburbs. They can't possibly both be playing in the same city. So I'm just interested in how this off-the-field competition ends up.
Excellent. Taylor, what are you thinking about?
Well, we're working on a lot of stories over at First Coast News, especially crime, violence, and addressing that in the city. So don't want to give away any ideas yet because they're still in the process, but definitely getting answers for the public and how the city and law enforcement is hoping to combat that.
Excellent. And Travis.
Yeah, so big story this week, the case of baby Jane Doe in Georgia. Just an incredible case, a cold case that was solved 35 years later. They just made an arrest. I'm talking to an investigator, the lead investigator on the case today. She's from Ware County. She had a personal connection. She asked to be put on this case.
Life South Community Blood Centers, providing blood and patient services to the local hospitals, serving patients in this community. Donating blood with Life South helps save lives. More at lifesouth.org to find a blood drive near you.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
Does this sound like the greatest deliberative body in the world?
Stand your butt up then. You stand your butt up. Oh, hold on. Oh, stop it.
Or Fight Club?
He didn't see any cameras. He didn't think anybody was paying attention, but Claudia from NPR was paying attention.
Congress comes to blows, but somehow finds a way to avoid a shutdown. The Friday News Roundup will catch you up on all the hits, some of the misses from the week next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. It's Friday, so it's time for our Friday JME DJ sessions. The Jacksonville Music Experience team showcases the latest tracks from national and international acts, as well as homegrown local artists. Connoisseur of all things melodious, Matt Shaw is here to share a few of the earworms that you can catch in rotation on the independent 89.9 HD4 WJCT's new music discovery station. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the three songs I've prepared for us, I just want to mention that the Music Buzz this morning is all about Andre 3000's first new solo album in 17 years. Co-founder of Outkast and creator of solo hits like Hey Ya. Dropped 90 minutes of ambient music. No bars, no rhymes, just synths and some flutes. I spent the morning listening to it. I'm hoping we can close this segment with it. But first, The Smile. This is a trio made up of Radiohead's Tom York and Johnny Greenwood and drummer Tom Skinner. They played St. Augustine Amphitheater earlier this year. Their first album was 2022's Delight for attracting attention. It's got cool grooves, big symphonic sounds. Sounds a lot like Radiohead. The Smile has a new single called Wall of Eyes. It's kind of an acoustic number that grows bigger and bigger with orchestral accompaniment and York's haunting vocals. Here's Radiohead, The Smile with Wall of Eyes.
Was actually fortunate enough to see that show at the amphitheater.
That's
and yeah,
cool.
really great. A lot like Radiohead, but also just an intense, kind of very sonic wall.
Totally. Yeah. My friend has a theory that York and Greenwood, they started The Smile because Radiohead was just too big of a thing. Like they can't play any venue for just one night. They have to play multiple nights. So they're just like, we'll call it The Smile and just make Radiohead songs. So that's the theory. But Blonde Redhead is another kind of experimental indie rock trio. They formed in Brooklyn in the early 90s, and they're one of those bands that, if you like them at all, a lot of people, this is like their favorite band. They returned this year with their first album of new music in 9 years. I want to play the song Snowman, which is a good example of the kind of unconventional soundscape for which the band is known. Here's Snowman by Blonde Redhead.
Only some only know why it was far. Fight a writing love song we used to hide. Do you feel alive?
So they're playing at the Winterland Festival?
Yeah, it was announced last week. They're the Friday night headliner of the 3-day music festival that happens downtown this year. It's in James Weldon Johnson Park in the middle of downtown. That's the last weekend in February.
That should be awesome.
Yeah, so there's another announcement coming today for Saturday's lineup, and then next week they'll announce Sundays. But sticking with local music, I guess, here, every year when the Jags go to London, much is made about this economic exchange between the UK and us, but there's a cultural exchange underway. This is Cosmic Link. It's a collaboration between Jack's singer and multi-instrumentalist Jay Maestro and a UK producer by the name of Ben DeBiasen. Future Soul is what the duo calls their mix of soul, jazz, R&B, and existential lyrics. Dan Brown, our own Dan Brown from JME, interviewed Cosmic Link, and my favorite quote from this, Jay Maestro says, "If Grover Washington Jr. and Erykah Badu raised a Gen Z kid with hip-hop sensibilities and new age philosophy, this is what Cosmic Link would sound like."
What a stew.
So here's the song Let It Go from Cosmic Link's self-titled full-length.
Thinking that some things I can't forgive. Let it go. The false, the failures, and the broken promises. Let it go. They move on while I just let resentment stew. Let it go. Holding on to what they did or didn't do. Let it go. All the stressing. Let it go. Second guessing.
Nice.
All these songs are in rotation on the independent 89.9 HD4. We play a local song 20 minutes after the hour every hour, so you can hear what's new locally and also what's playing around the country and internationally too.
Excellent. Matt Shaw, thank you so much for being here today. And we'd also like to thank our reporter guest this morning. We're going to be closing out with Andre 3000's, one of his ambient offerings on his new release. It's called Ants to You, Gods to Who. I'm Ann Schindler. And you've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9. If you missed anything today, you can check out our rebroadcast at 8 p.m. Join us again on Monday when I sit down with Representative Sam Garrison and Assistant Public Defender Terry Saab to talk about the crisis of mental health care and homelessness.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT.